One of the most plugged-in insiders covering the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike DeFabo of The Athletic, has just delivered a wave of crucial updates straight from the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. And if you care about where this franchise is heading in 2026, you need to pay very close attention to what's unfolding behind the scenes. Let's start with a move that already happened. According to DeFabo, the Steelers are planning to release offensive tackle Calvin Anderson. This move will save the team $2 million of his $2.4 million cap hit in 2026. And just to avoid any confusion, this is not Spencer Anderson. Spencer remains on the roster and continues to offer depth, including that jumbo tight end versatility the coaching staff likes. Calvin Anderson, however, dealt with multiple injuries, and despite signing a new deal last offseason, his time in Pittsburgh appears to be coming to an end. Now, this immediately raises questions about tackle depth. Broderick Jones' status heading into next season isn't completely clear, and there are concerns about whether he'll be ready for the start of camp. Dylan Cook showed promise at left tackle last year, and Troy Fautanu was expected to handle the right side. But with Calvin Anderson out, it would not be surprising to see Pittsburgh bring in additional veteran depth or invest in a rookie to stabilize the position group. From there, the spotlight shifts to quarterback, and this is where things get very interesting. The Steelers believe Aaron Rodgers will return in 2026. That's the internal feeling, according to DeFabo. Rodgers reportedly had positive exit meetings in January, and since then, there has been consistent communication between him and the organization at every level: players, coaches, and top decision-makers. The sense is optimism. However, until Rodgers gives a definitive answer, the team cannot operate with absolute certainty. What stands out is the tone of those communications. They've been described as positive. Rodgers' body reportedly felt good at the end of last season, and with free agency approaching quickly, the Steelers would clearly prefer an answer sooner rather than later. But internally, there's confidence. The belief is that he will be back under center in 2026. Meanwhile, there's been real trade interest in tight end Pat Freiermuth. At least 6 teams have expressed interest in exploring a deal, but as of now, the Steelers are telling teams he is not available. That is a significant statement. If Pittsburgh is turning down inquiries, that signals intent. It suggests they have a plan for Freiermuth in this offense. And when you consider the offensive philosophy under Mike McCarthy, that makes sense. McCarthy's system heavily utilizes tight ends on choice routes, particularly in the slot. We saw how Dalton Schultz thrived in that structure in Dallas. Freiermuth's skill set aligns naturally with that approach. His chemistry with Rodgers late last season was noticeable, and increased usage could unlock another level in 2026. Jonnu Smith, on the other hand, is in a more fluid situation. DeFabo reports that his status is less certain. Releasing him would save $7 million against the cap. The organization may like him, but financially, and from a production standpoint, it becomes a legitimate discussion point. Darnell Washington and Freiermuth are expected to command the majority of snaps, and cap flexibility matters. Perhaps the most fascinating development centers around Nick Herbig. There is league-wide belief that the Steelers would like to extend him while also keeping both TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. That would mean committing major money to 3 edge rushers. Herbig led the league in pass rush win rate last season and has consistently produced when called upon, whether rotating or stepping in as a starter. The question becomes strategic. Can you manage snap counts in a way that keeps all 3 satisfied while maximizing performance? Last season, when healthy, Watt averaged 57 snaps per game, Highsmith 51, and Herbig significantly fewer. But if you structure rotations closer to 40 snaps per game for each primary rusher, you potentially keep everyone fresher over the long haul. Financially, it would be heavy. Watt carries a $42 million cap hit. Highsmith sits at $20 million. Extending Herbig could push the room into rare territory. However, the Steelers are in a healthier cap position because they are not paying top-tier quarterback money. That flexibility opens unconventional paths. There's even a long-term scenario where you extend Herbig now, maintain the trio for 2026, and then evaluate Highsmith's trade value in 2027 when he approaches 30 years old and the final year of his deal. That could return draft capital while keeping Watt and Herbig as the future duo. It's complex, but it's calculated. On the defensive back end, the Steelers met with representatives for James Pierre and also spoke with Asante Samuel Jr.'s camp. Pierre could potentially return on a modest, multi-year deal slightly above the veteran minimum. Samuel's situation is more medically complicated following spinal fusion surgery, and the market may reflect that limited medical clearance across the league. Pittsburgh was reportedly one of the few teams willing to clear him last year. In addition to veteran conversations, the team formally met with a significant number of cornerback prospects at the Combine, many projected as earlier round picks. The expectation is that Pittsburgh will draft a corner relatively early to pair with Joey Porter Jr. for the future. So here's where we stand. A veteran tackle released to create flexibility, optimism surrounding Aaron Rodgers' return, Pat Freiermuth drawing trade interest but firmly in the plans. Jonnu Smith's future uncertain. A potentially historic investment brewing at edge rusher with Nick Herbig, and a clear intent to reinforce the cornerback room through both free agency and the draft. The Steelers are not standing still. Every move signals layered strategy rather than reaction. Now I want to know what you think about the direction they're heading. If you had to prioritize one storyline above all the others right now, Roderick's decision, extending Herbig, keeping Freiermuth, or reshaping the secondary, which one matters most to you as we approach this offseason turning point? If you really step back and look at everything together, you start to see a very deliberate blueprint forming for 2026. This is not random roster shuffling. This is calculated positioning. Take the Rodgers situation again. The Steelers are showing patience, and patience tells you something. If they were uncertain about him physically or emotionally, they would already be aggressively pursuing a contingency plan in free agency. Instead, the messaging is steady. Positive exit meetings, ongoing communication, optimism inside the building. That signals belief. It also signals that the coaching staff feels the offensive structure they're building works with him at the center of it. And think about the ripple effect. If Rodgers does officially commit, Freiermuth's role expands, the tight end room becomes more clearly defined. The draft strategy shifts slightly because quarterback urgency decreases. Cap allocation becomes more targeted rather than reactive. Everything stabilizes. Now layer in the offensive line decision. Moving on from Calvin Anderson isn't just about $2 million in savings. It's about reallocating resources. If Broderick Jones' availability for camp is even slightly in doubt, depth becomes critical. But that depth must be financially efficient. You can't overspend at tackle if you're preparing for heavy investments at edge rusher or possibly corner. So the release fits the broader flexibility theme. Then there's the Herbig situation, and this is where it gets fascinating from a roster building perspective. The Steelers have historically built their defensive identity around elite edge pressure. TJ Watt is the face of that identity. Alex Highsmith complements him with consistent production, but Nick Herbig's emergence changes the equation. When a rotational player leads the league in pass rush win rate, you don't ignore that. You evaluate how to sustain it. The idea of a three-man rotation isn't radical anymore in today's NFL. With offenses spreading defenses out and increasing tempo, keeping pass rushers fresh is almost a necessity. If Pittsburgh can engineer snap distribution that keeps Watt explosive deep into games and into December, that could be the difference between a strong defense and a dominant one. Financially, yes, it would be one of the most expensive outside linebacker rooms in football. But remember what Omar Khan emphasized, the Steelers are not currently allocating elite tier money at quarterback. That gives them unusual flexibility. Most contenders have to choose between paying the quarterback and reinforcing the defensive front. Pittsburgh may temporarily be able to do both at premium defensive positions. And that potential 2027 pivot involving Highsmith, that's long-term chess. If you extend Herbig now and maintain all three through 2026, you preserve maximum competitiveness. Then, if needed, you evaluate Highsmith's trade value with manageable dead cap implications. It's not about wanting to lose a good player, it's about asset management while keeping the defense structurally intact. Now shift back to the secondary. Meeting with 45 prospects at the Combine, many of them cornerbacks, sends a message. Joey Porter Jr. is foundational, but the Steelers understand the modern AFC requires depth and versatility at corner. You can't survive against elite passing attacks without multiple capable cover players. James Pierre returning would represent continuity. He understands the system and showed reliability last season. Asante Samuel Jr. presents upside, but medical considerations will influence contract structure and guarantees. The market suppression due to limited medical clearance could create a value opportunity, but it's still a calculated risk. Drafting a corner early feels almost inevitable based on the volume of formal meetings conducted. That tells you they're serious about injecting youth and long-term stability into that room. And pairing a rookie with Porter could solidify that position group for years. When you connect all of this, the overarching theme becomes flexibility with purpose. Cap flexibility, rotational flexibility, draft flexibility. The Steelers are positioning themselves so that when the Rodgers decision drops, they can pivot quickly and aggressively in free agency if needed. But here's the real underlying question. Are they building for one more strong push in 2026? Or are they quietly constructing a bridge to sustain contention beyond that? Extending Urbig suggests long-term thinking. Drafting corners early suggests future planning. Being patient with Rodgers suggests short-term competitiveness. They're walking a line between both timelines, and that's what makes this offseason so compelling. Every single decision interlocks with another. There is very little margin for error, especially if you're committing major cap space to one positional group. So as we move closer to free agency and wait on Rodgers' official word, think about this carefully. Would you rather see the Steelers go all-in on maximizing 2026 with aggressive cap maneuvers, or would you prefer they prioritize long-term roster balance, even if it means slightly less firepower this season? And the deeper you go into this, the clearer it becomes that the Steelers are trying to avoid the classic trap of being stuck in the middle. They don't want to be a team that hovers around 9 wins with no clear direction. Every signal coming out of Indianapolis suggests intentional alignment between the front office and coaching staff. If Aaron Rodgers confirms his return, that's your stability at quarterback. That immediately allows the offense to build continuity rather than reset. It allows Mike McCarthy's system to expand instead of simplify. It gives Pat Freiermuth the chance to fully step into that high-volume tight end role that fits this scheme so well. It gives the wide receivers consistency in timing and chemistry. And most importantly, it prevents the front office from panicking in the draft. Because, let's be honest, if Rodgers were not coming back, the urgency to address quarterback would completely change draft priorities. You might be forced to reach, you might have to sacrifice value elsewhere. Instead, if he returns, you can stick to strengthening tackle depth, reinforcing cornerback, and preparing for long-term defensive sustainability. And sustainability is really the word that defines the Urbig discussion. The Steelers are not just reacting to one productive season, they're evaluating trajectory. Nick Herbig has shown efficiency, explosiveness, and consistency in limited snaps. When he stepped into bigger roles due to injuries, he hasn't disappeared. That's the kind of internal development you want to reward, but rewarding him without destabilizing the cap is the balancing act. TJ Watt's $42 million cap hit is massive. Alex Highsmith's $20 million is significant. Adding a potential $18 to $20 million annual extension for Herbig pushes this into rare territory. However, creative structuring, backloading, signing bonuses, restructures can smooth that curve for 2026. The real test would come in 2027 and beyond. That's why the possible Highsmith trade scenario exists in the background. Not because the Steelers want to weaken the defense, but because timing matters. If you can extract draft capital while minimizing dead money and maintaining a dominant edge duo in Watt and Herbig, that's strategic turnover rather than loss. At cornerback, the strategy is equally layered. Meeting with that many early-round prospects isn't random. It's evaluation with intent. Joey Porter Jr. is a cornerstone, but the AFC is loaded with elite quarterbacks and receiving talent. You cannot rely on one lockdown corner alone. You need depth, competition, and developmental upside. James Pierre represents familiarity and cost control. Asante Samuel Jr. represents upside tempered by medical evaluation. Drafting a corner early adds insurance and future stability. All three paths are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they could coexist, resign one veteran, draft a rookie early, and allow competition to shape the depth chart. Then there's the quiet but